I'm just doing a quick explanation of how I do this this echo chamber of my mind thing. I go back and read the blog post. Small fragment of the history of the Corporation of the City of London. It dates back to 1067. And the bit that I saw when I went to the Wikipedia page was this little fragment about the corporation had its privileges stripped by a writ quo warranto under Charles II in 1683, but they were later restored and confirmed by Act of Parliament under William and Mary in 1690 after the Glorious Revolution, with growing demands on the corporation and a corresponding need to raise local taxes from the commoners. The Common Council grew in importance and has been the principal governing body of the City of London since the 18th century. In January 1898, the Common Council gained the full right to collect local rates when the City of London Sewers Act transferred the powers and duties of the Commissioners of Sewers of the City of London to the corporation. You just think the way okay, so they were only collecting local rates, but they made an industry out of it. A separate commission of sewers was created for the City of London after the Great Fire in 1666. So exactly on the 600th anniversary of the Norman conquest, and as well as the construction of drains, it had responsibility for the prevention of flooding, paving, cleaning and lighting the City of London's streets and churchyards and burials. The individual commissioners were previously nominated by the corporation, but it was a separate body. The corporation had earlier limited rating powers in relation to raising funds for the police, as well as the militia rate and some rates in relation to general requirements of the corporation. And then I went back and listened to this, not about the banality of evil. Of Eichmann. So it's much better watching YouTube embedded on a web page for me, because then I don't get the advertisements. So I can actually focus this way.
The would say reason in this Kantian sense is our faculty to think and to think beyond the limitations of knowledge, to think and knowing that we can never get knowledge that way, and still not say that it's meaningless. See, if you would, for instance, say, a triangle laughs, that is not an uncouth statement, that's a meaningless statement.
So when I was a long way back, when I was in contact with my daughter and things were going well, and she'd just gone to Paris. She had a year out in Paris. I said, get in touch with Henri Atlan if you can, or somebody involved in that research, and we'll talk about the notion of identifying authors by the semantic content. It was a very, very strange and very vague idea of mine. But it came from reading Dodgson Madden's book, The Diary of William Silence, in which he talks about identifying the author of Shakespeare being something akin to proving the internal angles of a triangle sum to 180 degrees. And this is a famous example or it's a kind of central principle in Aristotle's logic of definition by proof rather than by division, which was Plato's method. And in fact, the proposition in Euclid which proves that the angles of a triangle sum to 180 degrees is a proof, but it's a proof that is arrived at by division. If you see the whole, you can then very easily produce the proof. And on various places I've shown where the diagram is for that. I'll post it as a link in the description. So I talked to my daughter about this mysterious idea I had about identifying authors by what they write about. And I think this connects with what you later produce as an idea from that is the idea of the evolution of personality that I think was what Jan Smuts was trying to get at in his book Holism and Evolution. And this, I wrote about this on the page, Moritz Klein doing real Greek Lego. And that's just a joke, because Lego, roughly translated, if you put it in Greek, means something like I say, and it's statements or words. And in that, we got Henri Atlan's fantastic essay Uncommon Finalities in the book Gaia, A Way of Knowing, published in 1987. One of the main problems in biology for a long time has been the problem of final causes. Their existence was obvious for Aristotle without any reference to theology. However, this question became a real problem in the last century when the scientists did not want to accept the idea of final causes as part of a scientific explanation. I do not want to go into the reason they did not want to do so now, since I shall come back to this point, but in biology especially this problem was crucial, because plain observations of living systems impose the idea of finalism of some sort. We know in advance what will happen to an egg, and everything seems to happen as if the development of the egg toward the adult form is determined by the final state as much as, or even more than, by the previous state, i.e. just being an egg. The question, of course, was always how to explain that, and this was the subject of the great classical debate between the vitalists and the mechanists. The former believed that the only way to explain this kind of phenomenon was to assume vital forces directing the evolution of the living system towards its final stage, while the latter did not want to accept such an explanation, and preferred to look for physico-chemical causal phenomena which would explain the process as a consequence of causes and effects. And there's the rest of that essay. It's really well worth reading, and if you go to that post on the blog page about Moritz Klein doing real Greek Lego, you'll see what I mean. What you have is Moritz Klein.
I love old school analog drum machines like this Roland TR-606.
What he's doing is he's recreating a synthesizer from the electronic principles, and he's describing how the circuits work in a causal manner. His goal is to produce a Roland TR-606 sounding drum machine. Jean-Michel Jarre, if you listen to him,
Rocky 2. It was more an idea of getting the continuation of something I had done a few years ago, and I had this idea almost right away. I stopped the first Oxygen. I didn't plan necessarily to do this Oxygen 7 to 13 this year necessarily. It would have been last year or next year, but it happened like this, and at a moment where it seems that a lot of people seems to be more and more interested by analog instruments, analog synthesizers, to go back to, like for a guitar player to play on your old Stratocaster, for instance, instead of getting the last MIDI guitar or whatever. In a sense, it's I would say that if it's not my unplugged album, it's a kind of replugged album for me. I mean, to be replugged to my roots, to this kind of excitement I always felt by working on textures and working on sounds with no particular strategy, just having fun about dealing with sounds.
Now look at the way he's working it. He's tweaking these circuits at a much higher level.
The main excitement.
And he thinks of the process as he has an idea in his mind of the sounds as little actors on a stage, and each sound is a kind of nexus of actual sounds. What he calls sounds are actually composed of beats and a kind of interacting internal dialogue, a kind of autopoetic entity within the composition. So he composes by composing these autopoetic entities, and that is the sense in which Atlan talks about the articulation between layers, where as you go from one layer to the other, what becomes a restriction in one layer becomes a degree of freedom in the next layer. So that leads on to Atlan, and this description here on the page 119, this is 9 pages after that introduction. I will come back to this later, but what I want to note now is that here, at this crucial point where we're dealing with the articulation of one level with respect to the other, that we encounter also a puzzling problem, which can be stated in terms of information theory as the creation of meaning. Again, to make things short, I want to present this in a very schematic way. If a system is going to function, then there must be exchange of information, of course, with the surroundings, but also within the system itself, and within the system there must be exchange of information not only between constitutive parts, but also between levels of organization. However, in most cases we do not have access to this latter transmission of information. We do not know how one level communicates with another, and we don't know that for a very simple reason, because it is we who are creating the different levels by means of different techniques of observation and experimentation. In other words, by choosing our levels of abstraction and the terms and words in which we explain things at the higher level as being a consequence or implied in the what happens at the lower level. Therefore, what happens between these levels is absolutely obscure to us, since we have no access to it. What the idea of complexity from noise expresses essentially is that in this situation, in which we are as observers of a system with different levels, the untightening of the constraints at one level will create functional complexity rather than mere organization, under the condition that the complexity will be felt at a different, more integrated level. In other words, this idea implies that the new relations created by the untightening will be integrated into a new organization with more diversity and less redundancy, but only under the condition that there will be a functional way to do that. That is why this theory is a theory of necessary conditions and not sufficient conditions, because it is a theory based on the lack of knowledge that we have about how the system manages to organize itself. So by necessary conditions, he means things without which this could not happen, rather than sufficient things, which are sufficient conditions, which are conditions which would make this inevitable. For example, among other things, the high initial redundancy, which is a necessary condition for self-organization, is certainly not a sufficient one. And you can go on and read the rest. But so my idea was to show you how I do this blogging thing, and I recycle, and each time I go back to these ideas, I get more. The context in which I placed them changes, and it usually, if it's going right, then it kind of locks in on a kind of next level. So we're talking about sound and the abstraction of the notion of sound, and that's what Koenig's manometric flame apparatus does. The notion of sound and frequency, and the idea that you could actually reduce sound to just a pressure wave, came from this device of Koenig, which was basically a candle fluttering in the sound pressure wave from a speaker or an instrument. And that's where Giorgio by Moroder comes in. There are no rules as you go from the one level to the next, because you're making a new level. And then Atlan talking about functionalism took me to Putnam and his 1977 talk, which is brilliant. Philosophy in Our Mental Life. There we go. That's how you do blogging. Well, that's how I do it, and I think it's a good thing to do. You can produce these evolving dialogues, and I'm doing it with other people. In particular, the channel Philosophy Overdose. It's at Philosophy Overdose 2 on YouTube. It's absolutely marvelous how stuff pops up on that channel, and there's a definite interplay going on. It's brilliant. I love it. Thank you very much, whoever you are.